I sat there, staring at her as if she had just told me she was moving to another planet. Ashley, my wife of 8 years, was sitting across from me at our kitchen table, giving me that calm, almost detached look she always gave when discussing something she was dead serious about. But this? I couldn't believe my ears. Her idea was absurd, surreal even. She had just told me that she wanted to take a lover. Yes, she even used that phrasing like she was living in some romantic novel. And the wild part? She didn't want it to affect our relationship. Ashley said she loved me and was committed to our life together, but felt she needed more. Nothing has to change between us, she said, resting her hand on mine with a soft smile. This would be something casual, just a way for me to explore another side of myself. But I don't want to lose us. This would only be on the side. I was 35, a history professor at a small college in Charleston, South Carolina. My life was a steady routine of lectures, grading, and the occasional conference. Ashley, on the other hand, was 33, a freelance graphic designer, full of life and ambition. She always had a bit of an adventurous side, but this, I never saw it coming. Have you thought about what you're asking? I finally managed, feeling the weight of each word like a stone in my chest. You're asking me to sit here while you date other people? She nodded, her expression unwavering. I think it could work, Daniel. We're modern people. This is just something I need to do for me. For a moment, I was too stunned to react. We had shared a home, dreams, and countless plans for the future. But now she was asking me to adjust to the idea of sharing her with someone else. I had questions, and part of me knew that this conversation was only the beginning. I was still reeling, my mind spinning as I tried to process what Ashley was telling me. Was this really happening? My hands clenched the edge of the table so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying myself, and asked, so let me get this straight. You want to have someone else on the side, and you think it'll be what? Just a harmless addition to our marriage. Yes, she said, as if she'd rehearsed it. Her eyes were serious, calm. This isn't about you, Daniel. I still love you deeply, but I need more. Just something separate, something that's only mine. She reached across the table, but I pulled my hands back, feeling like they might burn under her touch. The rational part of me fought to keep calm, to understand, but my emotions boiled over, and the words escaped me before I could stop them. If I wanted this, I said, gesturing between us, if I wanted to take a lover on the side too, would you honestly be fine with it? Ashley's mouth opened, then closed again as if she hadn't expected that question. She cleared her throat, shifting in her seat. If it was the same sort of thing, something casual, then yes, I think I'd understand. Right? I replied, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. You wouldn't care, huh? Just be fine with it. The disbelief hit me hard, and I shook my head, laughing bitterly. You can't expect me to sit around like some backup plan while you experiment with more. This isn't some academic exercise, Ashley. This is real life. It's our life. My voice had risen, and she glanced around the room as if expecting someone else to overhear our argument. Daniel, I know this is hard to understand, but I thought you'd at least try to see it my way. I thought you loved me enough to give me this freedom. Freedom? I spat the word out, standing up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. Ashley, if you're asking for freedom, then it sounds like you want out. Not some side fling to broaden your horizons, or whatever it is you think you're after. I shook my head, and the realization of what I had to do settled over me, grounding me in a way her words never could. Where are you going? She asked as I turned to leave the room. To pack, I said, jaw clenched. If you're going to play games with my heart, I won't be sharing a bed with you. I left her there in the kitchen and headed down the hall to the guest room, my mind racing with the implications of what she'd just proposed. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just sit back and let Ashley pull me along in her little fantasy. I wasn't going to be some passive observer while she pursued a double life right under my nose. No, if this was what she wanted, then I needed to know the full extent of it. I needed the truth, even if it shattered every illusion I had left. The next morning, after she left for a client meeting that suddenly seemed all too suspicious, I made my move. I went straight to the electronics store and picked up 3 voice-activated recorders, small enough to fit anywhere. After a quick stop back home, I put one under the nightstand in our bedroom, one behind the living room bookshelf, and the third near her home office desk, where she often took her work calls. It was a calculated setup that would give me a complete picture of what was happening in our home. Then I turned my attention to her phone. We shared a family account, so I had access to the records. I called up our provider and requested a breakdown of her messages and calls from the past month, telling them I'd lost some information on the device. To my relief, they didn't ask too many questions, and a list of numbers and call logs soon appeared on my laptop. Within minutes, one particular number started standing out. One she'd been in touch with more than a dozen times over the past week alone. Greg. I remembered him from a few of our neighborhood barbecues, tall, athletic, with a cocky smile that suggested he'd never been denied anything he wanted. He lived about 10 minutes away, and until now, I'd thought nothing of his casual friendliness. The thought of him sneaking around with Ashley, sharing parts of her she'd once given only to me, turned my stomach. But I wasn't done. That evening, while Ashley was out at her supposed networking event, I logged into her laptop. She wasn't as clever with passwords as she thought, and after a couple of tries, I was in. I didn't have to dig far. Her emails were right there, in plain sight, along with a separate email account I'd never seen before. The inbox held a string of messages from Greg, filled with plans, hotel reservations, and details about a weekend trip they'd been meticulously planning for weeks. They'd picked a cozy spot out in Asheville, a secluded cabin rental just an hour's drive from the city. The weekend they had chosen was coming up, just 3 days away. I scrolled through the messages, noting Greg's sly promises of making her feel alive and her eager responses about finally getting what she needed. Her words, her excitement, her willingness to betray our life for a thrill. It all felt like a punch to the gut. I was reeling, but I knew what I had to do. This wasn't going to end in a screaming match or a broken heart alone. No, I had a plan now. The following morning, I wasted no time. I called the best divorce lawyer I could find in Charleston, a sharp, relentless guy named Martin Willis. He was known for handling cases with a ruthless edge, and that was exactly what I needed right now. After giving a quick overview of my situation, he scheduled me in for an emergency consultation later that afternoon. I arrived at Martin's office, a tall glass building downtown with a view over the harbor. He looked at me with steely eyes, not a trace of sympathy. Just as well, because I wasn't there for hand-holding. I laid out everything. Ashley's affair, the recorded conversations, the emails, the trip she was planning with Greg. Martin nodded, taking notes. "You've done well gathering evidence so far," he said. "But if you want to go through with this, you need to be thorough. Any slip-up, and Ashley could turn this around in her favor." "What about the financials?" I asked. I don't want to lose everything just because she decided she was missing something. Martin smirked. "You're thinking ahead, and that's good. We'll start with an inventory of all shared assets. Bank accounts, property, anything tied to your name. Once we file, she'll have access only to what the court allows." He closed his notepad and leaned forward. "There's another angle here, one we can use if you're interested." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "Greg," he said, his voice almost predatory. "We can hit him with an alienation of affection lawsuit." "Alienation of affection?" I repeated, barely believing what I was hearing. "It's an old-fashioned tort, but it's still active in South Carolina," he explained. "If you can prove he intentionally interfered in your marriage, causing the affection between you and Ashley to dissolve, you can sue him personally. Damages can be considerable: loss of consortium, emotional distress, financial impact. It's messy but effective." The thought of going after Greg directly was both unsettling and exhilarating. This guy wasn't just taking my wife, he was tearing my life apart. If Ashley wanted freedom with him, then maybe I'd show her what the cost of that freedom really looked like. Martin handed me a checklist, a roadmap to prepare for the divorce filing. Bank statements, joint account records, mortgage details, anything that could solidify my case. We set a strategy to track her communications with Greg even more closely. "I need you to be ready, Daniel," he said, "because once you confront her, things could escalate. She'll likely turn defensive, maybe even try to pin this back on you. We need every scrap of evidence in place before you make your move. Leaving his office, I felt like a general preparing for war. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was about saving everything I had built. I knew I had to confront Ashley soon, but I'd be damned if I let her or Greg walk away unscathed. They were in for a surprise. The countdown was on. With the legal gear set in motion, I decided to add my own personal touch to Ashley's romantic getaway. The cabin rental was reserved for this Friday, and I had a couple of days to set my plans in motion. If she wanted to spend her weekend with Greg, she'd get one. All right, just not the one she'd imagined. First, I made a quick call to a florist in Asheville and ordered a massive bouquet of flowers. Not romantic red roses, though. No, I went with an obnoxious, oversized spray of lilies. I even added a heavy floral fragrance mist to make it extra nauseating. They'd be nearly impossible to ignore, especially in a cozy cabin. Along with the flowers, I arranged for a mountain of gift baskets to be sent, each one packed with irritating items. Peanuts, scented candles, and a stack of puzzle books labeled Happy Anniversary to make things as awkward as possible. I'd requested everything to be delivered right around dinner time, ensuring their evening would be disturbed by unwelcome interruptions. But my pièce de résistance? That involved her favorite silk lingerie set. Ashley had spent a small fortune on a barely there red lace number she wore on special occasions. I'd seen it carefully laid out on her side of the closet, probably ready to be packed in her overnight bag. One afternoon while she was out, I slipped into the bedroom, grabbed the lingerie, and gave it a thorough dousing with pepper spray. It took a while for the initial fumes to dissipate, but after a few hours, the scent was practically unnoticeable. She wouldn't discover my handiwork until she wore it, and by then, well, she'd find herself in quite the predicament. The last piece of my sabotage involved her travel arrangements. I knew Ashley had booked a rental car to avoid using her own for this little adventure. A quick call pretending to be her confirmed the reservation, which I then promptly canceled, leaving her without wheels. Let her figure out how to get to Asheville without any transportation. Friday afternoon, I waited phone in hand, watching the clock. Around 4 p.m., Ashley hurried out the door, claiming she was going to a weekend retreat for her personal growth. I watched her drive off with a smug sense of satisfaction, knowing that her trip was about to unravel spectacularly. Not long after, I received the first update, a frantic message from Ashley saying her rental reservation had inexplicably vanished and she was scrambling to find another option. I didn't respond, naturally. I wanted to keep my role in the chaos concealed. My little gifts would be waiting for her at the cabin, and I had no intention of spoiling the surprise. The flowers, the baskets, the burning itch from her lingerie. She'd have to deal with every last one of them. For now, I settled back into my chair, savoring the calm before her storm of realizations hit. I couldn't stop myself. I had to see it with my own eyes, no matter how much it might hurt. I'd hidden a small camera in her overnight bag when she wasn't paying attention, rigged up to send a live feed to my phone. Part of me knew this would only twist the knife deeper, but I wanted to be fully aware of every lie, every betrayal. If Ashley thought she could dance around with another man while keeping me in the dark, she had another thing coming. Late Friday evening, I settled into the guest room with my phone, the glow of the screen casting a pale light across my face. There they were, Ashley and Greg, all cozied up in their romantic cabin. I watched as they fumbled with the keys, laughing in that carefree way I remembered from our early days together. It was a punch to the gut, and I felt a sharp mix of rage and sorrow clawing its way through me. This woman, the woman I'd built my life with, was now wrapped around a man who had zero respect for what we had. As they moved around the cabin, I could see her carefully place flowers and the mountain of ridiculous gift baskets I'd arranged for them to trip over. She looked puzzled, and I could only imagine her confusion at the happy anniversary banners draped over each basket. The satisfaction brought a fleeting smirk to my face, at least until Greg moved in close, whispering something to her that made her laugh softly. The sight of her leaning into him, so natural and intimate, broke the spell of satisfaction. She wasn't just with him. She looked like she belonged there, as if she had finally found something more. My fists tightened, and I felt every ounce of betrayal I'd tried to avoid come crashing down. This wasn't just some harmless fling, as she claimed. This was calculated, deeply personal. She had been lying to my face while her heart and mind were somewhere else entirely. But as their evening continued, my gifts started to work their magic. At one point, I watched her eyes water and her nose wrinkle as she opened one of the perfume-saturated candles. She held it up, sniffing cautiously, then gave a bewildered look to Greg. They must have been as puzzled as they were annoyed, which filled me with a dark, twisted satisfaction. They moved on to her luggage, where her lingerie was waiting, untouched and just as prepared as I'd left it. My stomach churned with anticipation, and I braced myself, wanting to savor the small victory I'd created. As she slipped into the bathroom to change, I kept watching the screen, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. Seconds later, she dashed out of the bathroom, clutching her chest, red-faced, her eyes brimming with tears as she clawed at the burning lace. Greg panicked, jumping up to try and help, but she swatted him away, struggling to figure out what was causing her to itch and burn. I watched, torn between laughter and something darker, an ache that settled deep in my chest. The satisfaction was there, but it was underscored by a deep, gut-wrenching sadness. This was the woman I'd loved, the woman I had believed in more than anything else in my life. My phone vibrated. Texts from Ashley, desperate messages asking me what could have gone wrong, where her rental car confirmation was, why there were so many flowers, what had gotten into her lingerie. I ignored them, every single one, watching her come undone from a distance, aware that whatever bond we'd once shared was now shattered, probably beyond repair. I turned off the feed and tossed the phone to the side, feeling both victorious and hollow, staring up at the ceiling, wondering if any of this was worth it. Ashley returned home late Sunday night, much earlier than she'd planned, probably because her dream weekend with Greg had turned into a disaster. I heard her come in, saw her hesitant movements as she stood in the doorway, her eyes searching for me in the darkened house. I was sitting in the living room, waiting, watching as she stumbled through the entryway, looking weary, her shoulders slumped. The confident, carefree woman she'd been with Greg was nowhere to be seen. She spotted me and froze, guilt flashing across her face before she quickly replaced it with a fragile smile. "Hey, Daniel," she started, her voice uncertain. "I can explain." "Spare me." I interrupted, my voice cold. I stood up and walked toward her, noting her hesitation, the way her fingers twisted her ring nervously. "I saw everything, Ashley. I know about Greg. I know about the romantic weekend you planned with him. I know about your lies." I kept my voice even, almost detached, knowing that the more I held back, the more power I had in this moment. Her face went pale, and she took a step back, fumbling for words. I am sorry. I didn't mean..." "Daniel, it was just, I don't know what got into me. It was just supposed to be something casual, right?" I cut her off, watching her cringe. "Nothing that would affect us." I laughed, and it was a bitter, hollow sound. "Well, you were wrong. This changes everything, Ashley. You destroyed our marriage the minute you decided that I wasn't enough for you." "Please, Daniel," she begged, tears welling up. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just needed something more. I thought I could come back and it would all be okay." "Okay." I shook my head, almost unable to believe her words. "Ashley, you looked me in the eyes and lied about wanting to make this work. You didn't even hesitate." I took a deep breath, the finality of what I was about to do settling over me. "Take off your ring, Ashley." Her hand instinctively went to her ring finger, clutching the band, and she looked up at me, a desperate plea in her eyes. "Daniel, don't do this. I can change. I can make it right, please. I love you. If you loved me, you wouldn't have lied, wouldn't have betrayed everything we had." My voice softened, but the resolve in it was clear. "The moment you chose him over us, you threw away this marriage." I held out my hand, waiting. She hesitated, tears now streaming down her face as she slid the ring off her finger, her hands shaking. She placed it in my open palm, and I closed my fingers around it, a symbolic gesture of reclaiming what she had tossed aside so easily. I watched as she crumbled, the weight of her actions hitting her fully for the first time. She reached out, desperate, but I took a step back, putting distance between us. This is over, Ashley. Whatever you thought we had, it's gone. She sank to her knees, sobbing, begging me to give her another chance. But I felt nothing but a hollow ache, a final, painful emptiness that came with knowing the person I loved had betrayed me in ways I couldn't forgive. I turned away, walking toward the door, leaving her there alone with the shattered pieces of what was left of our life together. As I stepped outside, I knew there was no going back. I had reclaimed my dignity, my future, and my freedom. She was left with the reality she had chosen, and as I closed the door behind me, I knew it was the final chapter of a marriage that had died long before she ever walked through that door. The morning after Ashley's tearful breakdown, I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, the wedding ring still clutched in my hand. I knew what I had to do next. Greg didn't get to just walk away from this. He wasn't some innocent bystander who'd been caught up in Ashley's fantasies. He was an active participant, perfectly willing to betray his own marriage for a thrill. And he wasn't going to walk away unscathed. With one last glance at Ashley's sleeping form in the guest room, I pulled up the contact information I'd saved from my investigation. Greg's wife, Emily. We'd met her a few times at neighborhood events. She was quiet, reserved, and had always looked at Greg with what I'd mistaken for admiration. Now, I knew that look hid a deeper truth. I dialed her number, taking a steadying breath as it rang. On the third ring, a soft, hesitant voice answered. Hello? Emily. This is Daniel, Ashley's husband. I know this call is probably the last thing you're expecting, but I think there are some things you need to know. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. I waited, unsure of how she'd respond. There was a pause, followed by a small, shaky sigh. I had a feeling, she finally said, her voice tight with the strain of barely contained emotion. He's been acting strange for weeks, but I kept telling myself it was just stress from work. She sounded so defeated, so resigned, that my anger gave way to a shared sadness. I'm so sorry, Emily, I said, meaning it. I didn't want to believe it either, but it's real. Ashley and Greg planned a weekend getaway together. I have proof, texts, emails, everything. I thought you deserved to know. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's painful, but I'd rather know than live in ignorance. Over the next hour, we went through everything we knew. She shared the same pain, the same anger, and the same need for justice that I felt. Emily revealed that this wasn't the first time Greg had acted suspiciously, though she had always brushed it off as paranoia. Now, faced with the truth, she resolved to take the same steps I was taking. Divorce was no longer an option. It was a necessity. She'd had enough of living in Greg's shadow, enough of the lies. As we talked, a quiet but powerful bond formed between us, a camaraderie built on shared betrayal. We agreed to support each other through the process, to exchange information, to lean on each other if things got rough. We were both heading into a war zone, and knowing someone else understood exactly what I was going through felt like a lifeline. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I checked in regularly, keeping each other updated as we filed for divorce, gathered more evidence, and braced ourselves for the inevitable confrontations. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the grief hit, when the raw anger surfaced again, when we had to remind ourselves that we were doing the right thing, painful as it was. Our alliance became a source of strength. We shared tips on attorneys, coordinated our cases to maximize the legal impact on Ashley and Greg, and reminded each other that we weren't alone in this fight. It was a strange, bittersweet bond, one that neither of us had wanted, but one that had become essential. Emily told me she was even filing for full custody of their 2 young children, determined to shield them from the damage Greg's actions had caused. In the end, the shared betrayal that had torn our lives apart was also what allowed us to rebuild. We weren't just victims anymore. We were taking control, demanding accountability, and finding a new kind of resilience through the support we gave each other. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. I'd lost my marriage, yes, but I'd gained an ally, someone who understood my pain better than anyone else ever could. And as we each moved forward with our own lives, Emily and I knew we'd come out the other side stronger than the people who'd tried to break us. A few days after my conversation with Emily, the divorce papers were ready. I'd been meticulous in my preparations, careful to cover every detail to ensure that Ashley's actions wouldn't just be swept under the rug. As difficult as it was to imagine, I knew there was no other way forward. I was finished with deception, with betrayal, with excuses. This was where our story ended. I arranged for her to be served in the comfort of our home. I wanted her to feel secure, blindsided as I'd been. And I stayed home that day to make sure she wouldn't be alone when the papers arrived. Around midday, the doorbell rang, and I heard Ashley's footsteps padding to the door. She probably expected a delivery, or maybe even some groceries I'd ordered. Instead, she opened the door to find a solemn courier with a folder in hand. She glanced at the envelope, then back at me, standing quietly in the kitchen. The realization dawned on her, slowly at first, until her face twisted in disbelief. Her hand trembled as she opened the envelope, flipping through the first few pages with a dazed expression. What is this?" she stammered, her voice unsteady. I stood firm, watching her with a calmness I hadn't known I could feel in a moment like this. "It's what you wanted, isn't it, Ashley? Freedom. Consequences." Her expression crumbled as the full weight of what she held sank in. "Daniel, please let's talk about this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought we could work through this. I never wanted this to happen." I shook my head, feeling a strange mixture of anger and sadness. "Did you think I'd just stand by, Ashley? Watch you play house with Greg while I stayed loyal, hoping you'd eventually find your way back to me?" I took a step closer, and she flinched, her face painted with guilt and regret. "This wasn't some innocent mistake. You planned it, lied about it, and you thought I'd be there to pick up the pieces once you'd had your adventure." She sank into a chair, clutching the papers as if they might disappear. "Daniel, I was confused," she pleaded, her eyes red and desperate. It was a moment of weakness. "I made a mistake, but I still love you. We can fix this. Please, just don't do this." "You made your choice, Ashley," I said, my voice steady and firm. "You wanted something outside our marriage, and now you have it. But it comes with a price. You don't get to shatter everything we had, and then come crawling back once it all falls apart." Tears streamed down her face, and she reached out, but I stepped back, keeping the distance between us. "Daniel, please. You have to understand, I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you." I shook my head. "If you didn't want to lose me, you wouldn't have betrayed me. I gave you everything, Ashley. I trusted you. I believed in us, and you threw it all away for a thrill." I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was my closure, my way of reclaiming the dignity she'd tried to strip from me. She collapsed into herself, her head in her hands, sobbing. I watched, feeling both the satisfaction of justice and the dull ache of loss. This wasn't how I'd ever pictured our life ending, but her choices had led us here, and now she had to face the consequences. "I won't change my mind," I said, my voice softer but unwavering. "It's time you live with what you've done, Ashley. This marriage is over." With that, I turned and left the room, leaving her alone with the papers, the silence thick with the finality of her betrayal. As I reached the doorway to leave, a final thought crossed my mind. I stopped, turned back, and pulled out the ring from my pocket. The wedding ring that had once symbolized everything I thought we had, everything I thought we'd built together. I'd taken it to a jeweler earlier that morning, asked him to press it flat until it was nothing more than a thin, crumpled circle of metal. Just a cold, warped reminder of what she'd destroyed. I walked back toward her, watching as she looked up, her tear-streaked face still desperate, still pleading for a way out of what she'd created. Her gaze fell on the ring in my hand, and I saw recognition dawn on her as she registered its shape, or rather, its disfigurement. I extended it to her, my face calm, my voice firm. "This is what's left of us, Ashley." She reached out, her hand trembling as she took the ring from my fingers, staring down at the twisted metal. Her face twisted with shock, then grief, as the reality of what I was saying sank in. "Daniel, please," she whispered, clutching the flattened ring in her palm as if she could will it back to its former shape. Her words came out in a broken murmur. It didn't have to end like this. We could have. No, Ashley. I shook my head, cutting her off. You did this. You crushed what we had with every lie, every stolen moment you thought you could keep hidden. This is exactly what's left, and you have no one to blame but yourself. I watched her crumble as she traced the mangled circle with her fingers, as if she were trying to remember what it used to feel like. Her tears started again, silent this time, her shoulders shaking with the quiet resignation of someone who finally understood just how far she'd fallen. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and desperate, searching for some glimmer of forgiveness. But I had none left to give. Goodbye, Ashley, I said, letting the finality of it settle between us. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving her with the symbol of our marriage, distorted beyond repair, just like everything else we once shared. And as I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing I'd left her with the one thing that told the story better than any words ever could. In the quiet that followed Ashley's departure, I sat alone in our empty house, absorbing the silence that replaced the chaos of the past few weeks. I'd been through hell and back, but as I sat there, a feeling of calm washed over me. I had a choice now. Let this betrayal fester inside me. Let it turn me into someone bitter and broken. Or I could take a step forward, find a way to rebuild without the weight of her choices dragging me down. My mind drifted to Emily, Greg's wife. Our shared betrayal had brought us together in an unexpected way, and through the weeks of planning and strategy, a quiet friendship had developed. There was something in her resilience that mirrored my own. She was stronger than she knew, yet vulnerable in a way I found myself drawn to. Perhaps, in some strange way, our shared pain could offer us both a path forward. A few days later, I decided to reach out. I called Emily, and we arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. I arrived first, finding a quiet corner table, and when she walked in, I noticed the way her eyes scanned the room, a mixture of uncertainty and determination on her face. When our eyes met, she smiled, and I could see a flicker of hope, one that mirrored my own. We spent hours talking, moving past the details of the past, and instead sharing pieces of who we were before all of this. I learned about her love for painting, her dream of one day owning a small gallery in town. She laughed as she described the challenges of raising 2 kids, her voice filling with warmth and pride. And in return, I opened up in a way I hadn't with anyone for a long time, telling her about my love of history, the years I'd spent building my career, the plans I'd once had with Ashley that now felt like shadows of another life. There was something deeply comforting about sitting across from her, someone who understood without needing explanation. Emily was graceful, composed, but every so often her guard would slip, and I'd catch a glimpse of the hurt she carried, the betrayal that still lingered beneath her surface. But in those moments, our connection felt all the more genuine, a bond forged from understanding, from a shared resilience that neither of us had asked for, but now owned fully. By the end of the evening, the cafe was nearly empty, and I felt a strange sense of ease, a lightness I hadn't known in months. As we stood to leave, she paused, looking up at me with a soft smile. "Thank you, Daniel," she said quietly, "for everything. I didn't think there'd be someone who could understand all of this." I nodded, feeling the same. I didn't either, but I'm glad we found each other. We exchanged numbers and agreed to meet again. No expectations, no pressure, just 2 people finding a way forward. As I watched her walk to her car, I felt a quiet but certain hope settle in. It was fragile, new, but it was there. Emily and I had each been broken by people we'd once trusted, but together, maybe we'd find a way to create something good, something real, built from understanding and mutual respect. And as I drove home, for the first time in months, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. There was still a long road ahead, but I knew I didn't have to walk it alone. Sitting alone in my new, quiet apartment a few months after that last encounter with Ashley, I had time to reflect on the journey I'd taken. From the initial shock and devastation to the bitter anger, to the calm resolve to rebuild my life. I'd gone through a whirlwind of emotions I never expected to feel, navigating choices I'd once believed were for other people, never for me. But betrayal has a way of showing up unannounced, and the aftermath tests you in ways you'd never imagined. I realized then that betrayal doesn't have to define us, even when it feels like it's consumed everything we've built. I could have let Ashley's choices harden me, could have spent years searching for justice, for retribution. But somewhere along the way, I discovered that moving forward with integrity and purpose was the greatest revenge, and the greatest gift I could give myself. Choosing to let go, to step into a future free of her shadow, became a kind of rebirth, a chance to find new meaning in my life without carrying the heavy weight of resentment. Meeting Emily was a pivotal part of that. She'd been just as broken as I was, but together we found the strength to step away from the pain, to refuse to let it define us. We supported each other, helped each other through the difficult days, and discovered that there was still life, and even laughter, waiting on the other side of heartbreak. Emily became a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are people who will understand, who will walk alongside you and help you rediscover who you are. Now, as I look back on it all, I feel an odd sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the way it forced me to grow, to confront the parts of myself that I'd been afraid to examine. Life rarely unfolds the way we expect, and sometimes the greatest revelations come from the harshest experiences. For anyone who might be reading this who's living through a similar heartbreak, wondering if they'll ever feel whole again, I want to tell you, yes, you will. Walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing yourself over the pain, choosing a future that values your worth. It's not easy. It's a path filled with quiet nights and restless thoughts. But if you keep going, you'll find a peace that's deeper than you knew possible. Don't stay trapped in a life where you're someone's afterthought, someone's safety net while they chase their own desires. You deserve more than that. You deserve respect, loyalty, and real, genuine love. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to let go, to walk away, and to give yourself the chance to find something beautiful beyond the pain. I'm still on that journey, still learning to let go, but I'm finding my way. And as I move forward, I do so with a heart that's stronger, a spirit that's resilient, and a mind open to new beginnings. I won't let betrayal be the final chapter of my story. Neither should you. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.